My mother texted me not to come to my own sister's engagement dinner because my lifestyle would embarrass them in front of her new wealthy in-laws. I was told the head count was final and that I needed to try to understand. So, I stayed in my penthouse alone, completely at peace. But that same night, my phone lit up with a frantic call from my sister. Her voice was shaking with pure panic as she screamed, "How could you do this to us? Mom just saw the magazine." Before I continue the story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep of the family who ended up owning the whole pasture. I stood in my glass-walled corporate office overlooking the sprawling Atlanta skyline, holding a custom-tailored emerald silk dress against my body. I had bought it specifically for tonight. It was modest enough to meet my mother Beverly's impossibly high standards of respectability, yet sharp enough to remind my sister Jada that I was happy to celebrate her engagement to Preston. The sunset was painting the city in shades of gold and deep purple, reflecting off the floor-to-ceiling windows of my headquarters. I was 35 years old, completely independent, and yet staring at that dress, I felt a familiar hollow knot forming in my chest. My phone buzzed on this cool surface of my marble desk. I reached for it, expecting a logistical update from my executive assistant or perhaps a text from Jada, asking if I could pick up a last-minute gift for her future in-laws. Instead, the screen illuminated with a message from Beverly. The words jumped out at me sharp and deliberate, carrying the exact tone of a woman who had spent a lifetime treating me as a liability. "Don't come tonight. The head count is final. Preston's family is very traditional, and we cannot risk your bohemian lifestyle making us look bad. Try to understand this merger is important for Jada." I read the message 3 times. There were no tears. I had stopped crying over my mother's casual cruelty a decade ago. There was only a cold, sharp realization settling over me like a heavy winter coat. She was calling my sister's marriage a merger. And in her eyes, I was a bad asset, a bohemian lifestyle. That was her coded language for the fact that I wore my hair in its natural texture, that I had walked away from the traditional path she had mapped out for me, and that I refused to shrink myself to fit into the rigid performative boxes of Atlanta's high society elite. I did not argue. I did not type out a paragraph begging for inclusion or demanding respect. I simply replied, "No worries. Understood." I walked over to the corner of my office and dropped the $2,000 silk dress directly into the trash can. The soft fabric pulled at the bottom, a physical representation of the familial ties I was finally ready to sever. The heavy oak door of my office swung open, and my business partner, Malik, walked in. He was wearing a sharp charcoal suit, carrying a thick stack of manila folders, and grinning from ear to ear. "Are you ready to sign the final documents, Zuri?" he asked, placing the files on the marble desk between us. "This is it, the biggest acquisition in our company's history." I looked at the documents, then back out at the Atlanta skyline. The city was lighting up millions of people going about their evening, unaware of the empire. Malik and I had just spent 5 years building from the ground up. I took his silver fountain pen, flipped to the signature pages, and signed my name with smooth, unbroken strokes. I did not blink. I did not hesitate. "You seem awfully calm for a woman who just secured a $40 million deal," Malik noted, raising an eyebrow as he gathered the signed pages. "I thought you would be rushing out of here to celebrate at your sister's engagement dinner. Are you ready to go face the music with Beverly?" I handed him the pen and offered a small, razor-sharp smile. "I am staying in tonight, Malik. Let them have their dinner." Malik paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he caught the tone in my voice. He had known me long enough to recognize when a boundary had been permanently drawn. As he began sorting through the final asset transfer list, our rapid-fire conversation filled the quiet office, revealing the history I had spent years clawing my way out of. 10 years ago, I was enrolled in a prestigious law program, exactly where Beverly and my father Roland wanted me. I was supposed to be the corporate attorney, the shining star of their country club circles, the perfect accessory to their desperate climb up the social ladder. But I hated every second of it. When I dropped out to start a small grassroots culinary and event curation business, Beverly acted as if I had committed treason. She told all her friends I was going through a phase. When the phase lasted longer than a year, she started introducing me simply as Jada's older sister who does a little catering on the side. Jada, on the other hand, played the golden child role to absolute perfection. She was a corporate consultant who never stepped out of line, never spoke out of turn, and always mirrored Beverly's desperate need for validation. Now, Jada was marrying Preston. Preston was a white man from a prominent wealthy real estate family with deep roots and old money. To Beverly, this union was the ultimate social trophy. It was her ticket to the upper echelons of society that had always kept her at arm's length. Your mother really thinks you are just running a few food trucks, does not she? Malik chuckled, shaking his head as he reviewed the asset schedule. She has absolutely no idea that your holding company has been quietly buying up the most exclusive hospitality venues in the Southeast. No, she does not, I replied, walking over to pour myself a glass of sparkling water. She assumes my natural hair, and my refusal to attend her society galas mean I am broke. She thinks independent wealth only counts if you use it to buy approval. Malik slid the final summary sheet across the desk toward me. Well, she is going to have a very hard time ignoring this. Take a look at the crown jewel of today's acquisition. I looked down at the top of the list. The bold black ink spelled out the name of the most elite, impossible to book, highly sought-after dining establishment in the entire city. Laura. It was a Michelin-starred masterpiece known for its exclusive client list and an unlisted phone number for reservations. It was also the exact restaurant where Beverly was hosting Jada and Preston's engagement dinner at this very moment. I tapped my perfectly manicured fingernail against the name on the paper. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a steak knife. Beverly had uninvited me from a dinner taking place inside a building that I now legally owned. Make sure the transition team sends out the complimentary notices to all the VIP tables tonight, Malik, I instructed, leaning back against my desk. We should start our new ownership off on a generous note. Malik smirked, gathering the folders. Consider it done, boss. Have a good night. As the heavy oak door clicked shut behind him, I felt a profound sense of tranquility wash over me. I ordered premium sushi from a spot down the street, drove my car back to my penthouse, and changed into my most comfortable loungewear. I sat on my plush velvet sofa eating spicy tuna rolls while watching the city lights twinkle below me. There was no anxiety. There was no fear of judgment. I was completely at peace. Across the city, the atmosphere inside Laura was the exact opposite of peaceful. The restaurant was a masterclass in understated luxury, featuring dim, warm lighting, acoustic paneling that swallowed the sound of clinking silverware and velvet booths that swallowed the elite guests who frequented it. Beverly was sitting at the best table in the house, sweating profusely through her designer gown, her face stretched into an exhausting artificial smile. She was desperate to impress Preston's parents, Richard and Catherine. Richard was a major venture capitalist who commanded attention simply by entering a room, and Catherine possessed that quiet, intimidating grace that came from generations of unearned wealth. Jada sat next to Preston, nodding enthusiastically at everything her future in-laws said, playing the role of the demure, agreeable bride-to-be. Beverly was working overtime to control the narrative. She laughed a little too loudly at Richard's dry jokes and constantly steered the conversation toward Jada's pristine resume and their families standing in the community. But the glaring absence of the bride's only sister hung over the table like a dark cloud. "It is such a shame your other daughter could not join us tonight," Catherine remarked delicately, slicing into her sea bass. "Preston has told us so much about how close he hopes the families will become. Is she traveling for work?" Beverly's eye twitched, but she recovered quickly, leaning forward with a conspiratorial sigh. "Oh, you know how it is, Catherine. Zuri is a sweet girl, but she struggles with commitment to a real career path. She is trying to keep a little catering gig afloat right now. It is taking all her energy just to make ends meet. I think she was a bit too embarrassed by her lack of success to mingle with us tonight. We try to be supportive, but some people just refuse to apply themselves." Jada nodded along immediately, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Exactly. Zuri is very bohemian. She just marches to the beat of her own drum, even if it means missing important family milestones. We told her the headcount was final weeks ago, but she could not get her schedule together." Richard frowned slightly, taking a sip of his wine. "That is a shame. In our family, we believe business should never overshadow family obligations, but I suppose everyone has their own priorities." Beverly practically beamed at the subtle validation, thrilled that she had successfully painted me as the unreliable, struggling sibling. She had insulated her perfect family image by sacrificing my character, a trade she had been making my entire life. Just as Beverly opened her mouth to pivot the conversation back to the country club wedding venue, she wanted Richard to pay for a senior seer approached their table. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, carrying a silver tray, holding a bottle of vintage champagne that Beverly knew cost upwards of $5,000. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," the sommelier said, his voice smooth and professional. "Please accept this bottle of our finest reserve. It is sent to your table with the highest compliments." Beverly practically glowed, her chest puffing out with pride. She immediately assumed that Richard's powerful family name had commanded this level of respect from the restaurant staff. She looked around the table, her smile triumphant. "Well, Richard, it seems the right connections really do open the right doors," Beverly boasted loudly, making sure the neighboring tables could hear her. "Lara is known for treating its most distinguished guests with the utmost respect. We are so glad to be merging our families tonight." Richard looked genuinely confused. He glanced at Catherine, then back to the sommelier. "I appreciate the gesture, but I do not know the management here. Who exactly is sending this?" The sommelier bowed slightly carefully, placing the crystal fluts on the table. He offered a polite, unwavering smile as he corrected my mother's assumption. "The champagne is not from the management, sir. It was sent directly by the new owner of the restaurant group. She acquired the holding company this afternoon and specifically requested that this bottle be brought to your table to celebrate the engagement. She wanted to ensure her family was well taken care of tonight." Beverly's triumphant smile froze on her face. Her brain struggled to process the words the sommelier had just spoken. Her family. Before Beverly could formulate a response, a loud chime echoed from the center of the table. Richard's phone, resting near his water glass, had just received a Google News alert. Richard was a venture capitalist whose entire fortune relied on tracking major corporate acquisitions in the Southeast. He picked up his phone, adjusting his reading glasses. His eyes widened in absolute shock as he read the notification on his screen. He looked up, his gaze darting from the glowing screen to Beverly's pale, trembling face. "The new owner, Richard," said, his voice laced with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Beverly, did you not just say your other daughter's name was Zuri?" "Yes, Richard. Her name is Zuri," my mother managed to choke out. Her voice was barely a whisper, stripped of all the pretentious confidence she had been projecting all evening. Richard did not notice her distress. He was entirely too captivated by the glowing screen of his phone. He placed the device flat in the dead center of the pristine white tablecloth, right between the crystal water goblets and the flickering centerpiece. The screen brightness was turned all the way up, illuminating the faces of everyone sitting at the table. It was the digital cover of Black Enterprise magazine, released in tandem with the leading national hospitality journal exactly 3 minutes prior. I was the cover star. I was looking directly into the camera lens, wearing a structured crimson power suit, my natural hair styled in a flawless crown of coils. I looked sharp, wealthy, and completely uncompromising. I looked like a titan of industry. I definitely did not look like a woman struggling to keep a food truck in business. Beneath my photograph, the headline screamed in bold, undeniable text: "Zuri Haynes acquires Laura Hospitality Group in a $40 million deal." Richard adjusted his reading glasses, leaning forward as if he could not believe his own eyes. He read the headline out loud, his voice booming across the quiet, exclusive dining room. $40 million. "Beverly, are you seeing this? Your daughter just bought the most prestigious restaurant group in the entire Southeast. Do you have any idea who she is?" Beverly sat frozen. Her throat went completely dry. The tailored fabric of her designer dress suddenly felt like a straitjacket restricting her airflow. She stared at my face on the digital cover, her mind violently short-circuiting. She tried to process how the daughter she had banished, the daughter she had just labeled a societal failure, now owned the very building they were dining in. "I have been trying to get a meeting with this woman for 6 months. Richard continued, striking the table with the palm of his hand in pure excitement. "My venture capital firm has been analyzing her portfolio since last year. Zuri Haynes is an absolute ghost in the corporate world. She never attends society galas. She never does press junkets, and she never takes outside funding. She just quietly buys up undervalued luxury properties and turns them into gold mines. We have been begging her executive team for just 10 minutes on her calendar, and to think the most elusive CEO in Atlanta is sitting right in my future family tree." Jada stared at the phone, the blood completely draining from her face. "40 million, she whispered, her voice trembling. Preston, completely oblivious to the toxic family dynamics at play, let out a loud cheer. He wrapped his arm around Jada and kissed her cheek. "Babe, your sister is a powerhouse. Why did you not tell me she was closing a massive acquisition today? No wonder she could not make it to dinner. She is probably buried under a mountain of legal paperwork. This is incredible news. Preston's genuine joy only highlighted the malicious silence coming from my mother and sister. Catherine, Preston's mother, slowly set down her silver fork. Catherine came from generations of old money, possessing that aristocratic intuition that could sniff out a lie from a mile away. She turned her sharp, calculating gaze directly onto Beverly. "Beverly," Catherine said, her tone dripping with polite but icy curiosity. "You just told us that Zuri was struggling to make ends meet. You said she was doing a little catering on the side and was too embarrassed by her lack of success to mingle with high society tonight. Acquiring a luxury hospitality group for $40 million in cash is not a little catering gig. Is there a specific reason you felt the need to downplay your own daughter's extraordinary achievement?" The power dynamic at the table flipped in an instant. Preston's parents entirely dropped all interest in Jada's carefully curated resume. They did not care about the country club anecdotes Beverly had spent the last hour reciting. They only wanted to talk about the woman on the magazine cover. They wanted to talk about me. Jada sat rigidly in her chair, feeling her carefully constructed spotlight being ripped away at her own engagement dinner. Beverly scrambled to save face, her hands shaking as she reached for her water glass. "Well, you see, Catherine Zuri is just so fiercely private about her finances. We like to stay humble in our family. We never want to boast about money. I simply wanted to respect her privacy during such a sensitive business transition." Catherine did not look convinced. She looked at Beverly the way one looks at a poor counterfeit handbag. "Humble," Catherine repeated softly. "There is a rather steep difference between being humble and actively painting your child as a financial failure." Richard waved away the social tension, completely consumed by the business implications. He looked eagerly at his future wife's mother. "Beverly, I need an introduction. I need you to set up a private dinner with Zuri by the end of the week. If my firm can get in on the ground floor of her next development phase, the returns would be astronomical. You have to make this happen for me." Beverly swallowed hard, her mouth opening and closing as she desperately searched for a lie that could buy her some time. She knew she had absolutely no access to me. She knew she had burned that bridge permanently just 12 hours ago, when she told me my bohemian lifestyle was a liability to her precious image. Before Beverly could formulate a response, the senior Sumayer returned to the table. He moved with graceful precision, retrieving the bottle of $5,000 vintage champagne from its silver ice bucket. He poured the sparkling liquid into Richard and Catherine's crystal flutes first, then Preston and Jada, and finally he stepped up beside my mother. As he poured the champagne into Beverly's glass, he offered a polite, unwavering smile that felt like a dagger twisting directly into her ribs. "Miss Haynes also requested that I pass along a personal message to you." "Madam," the Sumayer said, his voice carrying clearly over the soft jazz playing in the background. "She hopes you are enjoying the venue and she wants you to know that she completely agrees. The head count is absolutely perfect tonight." Beverly stared at the bubbling champagne in her glass, feeling the invisible walls of the restaurant closing in on her. The message was a flawless, undeniable power move. It was my way of letting her know that I saw everything I owned, everything, and she was only sitting in that chair because I allowed it. The struggling caterer lie was dead in the water, and Beverly was left drowning in the wreckage of her own arrogance. The Sumayer bowed slightly and walked away, leaving a deafening silence in his wake. Catherine turned her sharp gaze entirely onto my mother. "If your daughter owns this establishment," Catherine said, her voice dangerously calm, "why is she not sitting at this table?" Beverly scrambled. Her brain worked in overdrive to salvage the wreckage of her own arrogance. She forced a high-pitched laugh and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, Catherine, you have to understand the sheer magnitude of a $40 million deal. Zuri is just so incredibly busy finalizing the acquisition tonight. She was absolutely devastated that she could not make it, but she sends her love and insisted we celebrate without her." Catherine raised an eyebrow. She did not buy a single word. Richard, however, was too blinded by the prospect of a lucrative business connection to care about the family drama. For the rest of the agonizing three-course dinner, Jada sat in silence as her prospective in-laws completely ignored her. They did not ask about her corporate consulting job. They did not care about the country club wedding she wanted. They spent 2 hours relentlessly grilling Beverly for details about my investment strategies, my portfolio, and my operational tactics. Jada was eclipsed at her own celebration, relegated to the background while my name dominated every conversation. I was in my penthouse pouring myself a generous glass of Cabernet Sauvignon when my phone began to vibrate on the kitchen island. The caller ID displayed Jada's name. I let it ring twice before answering. Jada was calling from the marble bathroom of my restaurant. The echo of the tiled walls amplified her frantic, hysterical tone. She bypassed any form of greeting or apology. "How could you do this to us?" she shrieked. "Mom just saw the magazine. Preston's parents think we are deliberately hiding you. They have not asked me a single question about myself all night. Get down here right now. Put on a nice dress and play the supportive sister before you completely ruined my night." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine. The rich flavor bloomed on my tongue. I did not raise my voice. I sounded completely detached. "I cannot do that, Jada. The head count is final, remember? Enjoy the champagne." I pressed the end call button and immediately blocked her number. I turned off my phone, sank into my velvet sofa, and finished my wine in glorious, uninterrupted peace. That peace lasted exactly until 9 the next morning. I was sitting at my desk reviewing quarterly projections when a commotion erupted outside my office. My receptionist's polite voice was drowned out by Beverly's shrill demands. "I am the CEO's mother. I do not need an appointment." The heavy oak doors swung open. Beverly marched in, followed closely by my father, Roland. Roland had always been the passive enforcer of Beverly's toxic regime. He was a man who preferred to keep the peace by throwing me under the bus. They did not look apologetic. They looked entitled. Beverly slammed her designer handbag onto my desk. She acted as if the humiliation of the previous night had never happened. "You owe us an explanation, Zuri. But we can move past your little stunt on one condition." I leaned back in my leather chair and folded my hands together. "My little stunt? You mean my multi-million-dollar acquisition?" Beverly ignored me. She demanded that I use my new status and hospitality connections to secure Jada's dream wedding venue. It was a historic ultra-luxury estate just outside Atlanta, famous for its sprawling gardens and crystal chandeliers. It was also fully booked for the next 3 years. Beverly me to pull strings, bump another bride, and secure the venue as an apology for embarrassing them in front of Preston's family. I looked at Roland, waiting for him to finally step up and defend me. Instead, he shifted his weight and sighed. "Zuri, stop holding a grudge. You are a wealthy woman now. Be a team player for the family's image. Your sister needs this wedding to secure her place with Preston's family. You have the power to make it happen." I stared at the man who stood by while my mother locked me out of family photos because my natural hair did not fit their aesthetic. "Family takes care of family," Roland insisted, attempting a warm smile that fell completely flat. "You uninvited me from this family exactly 12 hours ago." I reminded them, my voice turning to ice. "You told me I was a liability. Now I am your concierge. The answer is no." Before Beverly could launch into a screaming match, the office door opened again. Jada walked in, followed by Preston. Preston was completely unaware of the toxic dynamic suffocating the room. He smiled warmly, stepping forward with his hand outstretched, genuinely excited to finally meet the famous Zuri Caldwell. Preston shook my hand, expressing profound admiration for my business acumen. He immediately pitched a highly lucrative collaboration between his family's real estate firm and my hospitality group. Beverly saw dollar signs. She saw a way to cement her status and tried to hijack the business meeting. She attempted to leverage Preston's presence to force me into paying the $150,000 cost of Jada's dream wedding. "Zuri is so generous," Preston Beverly chimed in loudly. "She is actually gifting Jada the venue and the catering for the wedding." I looked Preston dead in the eye. I politely declined his business offer, citing a strict policy against mixing family with corporate acquisitions. Preston was disappointed but respected my professional boundary gracefully. Beverly, however, was furious. Preston stepped out to take a phone call. The moment the door closed behind him, Beverly's mask dropped completely. She was venomous. She threatened to ruin my reputation in the local community. She claimed she would go to her sorority sisters, and the local elite, telling everyone that I abandoned my family for money and became a cold, heartless corporate sellout. She demanded the $150,000 wedding as hush money. Malik stepped forward to call security, but I held up a hand. I looked at Beverly, letting her think she had won. I sighed, feigning total defeat. "Fine," I said softly. "Jada will have her wedding at the historic estate. I will make the call." Beverly smirked, adjusting her designer bag. She was completely satisfied that the family hierarchy had been restored, and I had been put back in my place. They left the office triumphant. Malik looked at me completely shocked. "Why did you cave?" he asked. "You do not owe them a single dime." I walked over to my safe, pulled out a thick manila folder, and slid a property deed across my desk to Malik. "I did not cave, Malik. I own the estate and I'm going to let them sign the contract." A week later, Beverly and Jada arrived at the iron-wrought gates of Oakwood Manor. The historic estate sat on 50 acres of pristine Georgia countryside boasting manicured botanical gardens, a private lake, and a grand ballroom dripping with crystal chandeliers. It was the crown jewel of my hospitality portfolio, though neither my mother nor my sister had the slightest clue I held the deed. My venue director, a sharp and fiercely loyal woman named Maya, greeted them at the grand entrance. Following my exact instructions, Maya treated Beverly and Jada like absolute royalty. They were escorted into the bridal consultation suite and served complimentary bottomless mimosas in crystal flutes. From my office 20 m away, I watched the entire interaction unfold on a secure, high-define live feed. Beverly was practically vibrating with self-importance. She paraded around the suite, touching the imported silk drapes and loudly boasting to Maya about how Preston's family required a venue of this specific caliber. Jada sat on a velvet chaise lounge, sipping her mimosa, looking entirely relieved that her mother had seemingly bullied me into submission. After an hour of indulging Beverly's grandiosity, Maya retrieved a sleek leather portfolio from her desk. She placed the venue contract on the glass coffee table. "The estate is yours for the entire weekend, Mrs. Caldwell," Maya said smoothly, sliding a gold-plated pen across the table. "We only require the signature of the primary financial sponsor on our standard event agreement." Beverly did not even glance at the first page. She was too blinded by her own arrogance, desperate to lock down the venue before Preston's old money parents could question her capability. She grabbed the pen, ready to sign her name and take full credit for funding the $150,000 affair. "Just a moment," Maya interjected, placing a gentle hand on the document. "I must direct your attention to page 4. Oakwood Manor strictly enforces a comprehensive code of conduct and financial liability clause." Beverly scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "We are high society, sweetheart. We do not need a code of conduct. We know how to behave. It is non-negotiable for all our elite clients." Maya insisted with a polite but unyielding smile. "The clause mandates a zero-tolerance policy for the verbal abuse or harassment of our staff. If the primary signatory or any member of their party breaches this code, the event will be canceled immediately. Furthermore, the signatory will be held personally liable for the full $150,000 operational cost payable upon eviction." Beverly rolled her eyes, completely insulted by the mere suggestion that she would need to be held accountable for her behavior. She did not bother reading the fine print. She wanted the venue. She wanted the prestige. And she wanted the ultimate bragging rights. She quickly scrolled her signature at the bottom of the page, binding herself entirely to my terms, watching the screens in my office. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Malik leaned against the doorframe, watching the live feed with his arms crossed. "Do you really think she is going to breach the contract?" Malik asked, shaking his head at the screen. $150,000 is a massive liability. Even Beverly must have some basic self-control. I turned away from the monitor and looked at my business partner. I laughed, a genuine hearty sound that echoed in the spacious office. Malik Beverly cannot go 24 hours without belittling someone she thinks is beneath her. Put a tray of appetizers in front of her, and she will find a way to demean the person holding it. The trap is set. Now we just wait for her to step in it. Fast forward to the week of the wedding. The rehearsal dinner was an extravagant affair hosted in Oakwood Manor's glass-enclosed conservatory. The space was decorated flawlessly. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from the ceiling, and a string quartet played softly in the background. Preston's family mingled effortlessly with Atlanta's elite. Beverly was holding court in the center of the room. She paraded around the venue as if her name was on the deed, taking credit for every floral arrangement, every perfectly plated hors d'oeuvre, and the ambient lighting. She was desperate to prove she belonged in the same socioeconomic stratosphere as Preston's venture capitalist father and aristocratic mother. I was on site, but completely out of sight. I stood in the venue's shadowed control room, watching the floor through the two-way surveillance glass. I wore a sharp, tailored crimson suit identical to the one I wore on the magazine cover. My presence was a ticking time bomb, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate. The stress of maintaining absolute perfection was already starting to crack Beverly's facade. A minor delay in the kitchen regarding the second course sent her anxiety skyrocketing. She began pacing the floor, her eyes darting around the room, desperately looking for a target to absorb her frustration. Her gaze locked onto a young black waitress named Chloe. Chloe was a college student working her way through a degree, navigating the crowded room with a silver tray of wine glasses. In the rush of the dinner service, Chloe accidentally brought a tray of standard house wine to Preston's father instead of the vintage Bordeaux Beverly had specifically requested to impress him. It was a simple, easily correctable mistake, but to Beverly, it was an unforgivable assault on her social climbing efforts. Beverly marched across the conservatory floor, her heels clicking aggressively against the polished marble. She intercepted Chloe right before the young woman could reach the VIP table. Beverly snapped her manicured fingers directly in Chloe's face. The sharp, aggressive sound cut through the ambient chatter of the nearby guests. "What is wrong with you?" Beverly hissed, her voice rising well above an acceptable volume. "Are you completely incompetent?" I asked for the Bordeaux. "This is cheap swill. Do you even know how to read a label? Or did you drop out of school like the rest of the failures in this city?" Preston's parents turned around, their expressions morphing into absolute horror. The room began to quiet down as guests noticed the escalating commotion. Chloe stood frozen, her eyes wide, offering a stammering apology and attempting to switch out the glasses, when Maya, my venue director, stepped forward to gracefully intervene and de-escalate the situation. Beverly completely lost her grip on reality. "Do not tell me to calm down," Beverly shouted, snatching one of the wine glasses off Chloe's tray. She threw the glass directly onto the pristine marble floor. The crystal shattered with a violent crash. Red wine splattered across the polished stone and onto Chloe's uniform shoes. "Clean it up," Beverly demanded, pointing a trembling finger at the young waitress. "You people are completely useless. I paid a fortune for this venue, and I expect flawless service, not street-level incompetence." The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The silence in the conservatory was deafening, broken only by the sound of Beverly's heavy breathing. Jada rushed forward, grabbing her mother's arm, her face burning with humiliation. She tried to pull Beverly away, but the damage was already done. Preston stood up from his table, his jaw slacked in disbelief at the cruel, unhinged behavior unfolding in front of his conservative parents. Inside the control room, I adjusted the cuffs of my crimson suit. The time had come. I pushed open the double doors of the conservatory. The heavy mahogany panels swung wide, drawing the eyes of every single guest in the room. I stepped out of the shadows and walked slowly across the floor. The rhythmic click of my heels echoed through the dead, silent room. I did not look at Jada. I did not look at Preston or his horrified parents. I kept my gaze locked entirely on my mother. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corporate headquarters, casting long, sharp shadows across the marble floors. I was sitting behind my desk, sipping a hot cup of black coffee and reviewing the finalized acquisition documents from the previous day. I felt a profound sense of clarity. The frantic, hysterical phone call from my sister the night before had confirmed everything I already knew. They were terrified of my success because it was a success they could not control. My peace was abruptly shattered right at 9. A loud commotion erupted in the reception area just outside my office suite. The thick acoustic paneling of my walls usually muffled any outside noise, but Beverly's voice was designed to cut through steel. "Do you have any idea who I am?" I heard my mother shrieking at my executive assistant. "I am the mother of the CEO. I gave birth to the woman whose name is on the front of this building. I do not need an appointment to see my own daughter. Get out of my way before I have her fire you." I set my coffee mug down on the polished marble desk. I pressed the intercom button and spoke calmly to my assistant, telling her it was fine and that she could let them in. The heavy oak doors swung open violently. Beverly marched into my office, clutching her designer handbag like a weapon. She was wearing a pristine white suit, projecting the image of a flawless, wealthy matriarch. Right behind her walked my father, Roland. He stepped into the room with his hands in his pockets, looking around at the expensive artwork and modern furnishings with a mixture of awe and resentment. Beverly did not start with an apology. She did not express any remorse for uninviting me from the engagement dinner. She did not mention the lies she had told Preston's family about me struggling to run a catering gig. Instead, she marched directly up to my desk, slammed her handbag down on the marble surface, and glared at me with absolute entitlement. "You have a lot of nerve," Zuri Beverly spat her chest, heaving with indignation. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was for us last night? Richard and Catherine spent the entire evening asking questions about you. You completely overshadowed your sister on the most important night of her life." I leaned back in my leather chair, resting my hands on my lap. I did not raise my voice. I did not give her the satisfaction of seeing me angry. I was sitting in my penthouse in sweatpants eating takeout. I replied coolly, "I did exactly what you asked me to do, Beverly. You texted me that the head count was final. You told me my bohemian lifestyle would embarrass you in front of Preston's old money parents. I stayed home. If my mere existence managed to overshadow Jada from 10 miles away, that sounds like a personal problem." Beverly's face flushed a deep, angry red. She waved her hand dismissively, completely brushing past her own cruel behavior as if it were irrelevant. "That is in the past," Beverly declared, lifting her chin. "We are moving forward. Now that you have decided to publicly flaunt your wealth and humiliate us, you owe this family. You are going to use your new status and your restaurant connections to fix the mess you made." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely astounded by the sheer magnitude of her delusion. "What exactly do you want, Beverly?" "Jada needs the perfect wedding venue to secure her place with Preston's family," my mother demanded, her eyes gleaming with greed. "She wants Oakwood Manor. It is the most historic ultra-luxury estate outside of Atlanta. I know for a fact that it is fully booked for the next 3 years. But you are going to get it for her. You are going to call whoever you need to call. Pull whatever strings you need to pull and secure that venue for next month. You are going to do it as an apology for making us look like fools last night." The audacity hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Oakwood Manor was not just a venue. It was a 50-acre premier estate that catered exclusively to billionaire celebrities and international dignitaries. And Beverly expected me to simply snap my fingers and hand it over to the sister who had happily participated in my banishment. I shifted my gaze away from my mother and looked directly at my father. Roland had been standing quietly near the door, observing the entire exchange. For a brief, foolish moment, a small part of the child left inside me hoped he would intervene. I hoped he would look at his wife and tell her she was being unreasonable. I hoped he would finally acknowledge the emotional abuse I had endured for decades and stand up for me. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady, "are you really going to stand there and let her demand this after you both uninvited me from the family yesterday?" Roland sighed heavily, running a hand over his graying hair. He walked slowly toward the desk, pulling up one of the velvet guest chairs and sitting down. He looked at me with an expression of mild exhaustion, as if I were a stubborn child refusing to share a toy. "Zuri, you need to stop holding a grudge," Roland said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Your mother was just stressed about the dinner. You know how she gets. But you are a wealthy, powerful woman now. You have the resources to make this happen. Family takes care of family. You need to be a team player and think about our image. Jada marrying into Preston's family elevates all of us. Just make the calls and secure the estate. Do not be difficult." I stared at him, the last lingering thread of my familial loyalty, snapping completely. He was not a protector. He was a passive enforcer of Beverly's toxic regime. He had stood by while Beverly belittled my business, locked me out of family photos, and shamed my natural hair. And now he was using respectability politics to gaslight me into submission, weaponizing the concept of family only when it benefited their social climbing. There was no apology. There was no accountability. They had marched into my corporate headquarters not to make amends, but to collect a tax on my success. I looked at Beverly, whose eyes were shining with the absolute certainty that she had won. She firmly believed that my father's intervention had put me back in my place, back into the role of the subservient daughter desperate to buy their love. I slowly opened the top drawer of my desk. I pulled out a sleek black leather portfolio containing a single document. I placed it on the cool marble surface. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply looked at the two people who had spent my entire life making me feel small. "You want Oakwood Manor?" I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm whisper. "Yes," Beverly snapped eagerly. "And we expect you to cover the operational fees as your wedding gift to your sister." I placed my hand flat on the leather portfolio and slid it across the marble desk toward them. The document inside was ready, pristine, and waiting. "Then, open the folder." "Beverly," I instructed, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the table. Open it, and let us discuss the terms. Beverly snatched the leather portfolio with greedy, perfectly manicured hands. She flipped it open, her eyes, scanning the crisp white paper inside, fully expecting to see a deed transfer or a complimentary reservation confirmation. Instead, her face contorted in absolute confusion, which quickly morphed into bubbling outrage. It was a standard corporate event contract. Bold black ink detailed the venue rental fees, the operational costs, the catering minimums, and a very strict non-negotiable payment schedule. There was no family discount. There was no gift. It was a $150,000 invoice waiting for a signature. "What is this?" Beverly demanded, tossing the folder back onto the marble desk as if it had burned her fingertips. "I told you Jada needs this venue as a gift. I am not paying full market price for a property my own daughter controls. I am running a global hospitality empire." "Beverly," I replied smoothly, "I am not running a charity for people who treat me like dirt. If you want Oakwood Manor for your social climbing spectacle, you will sign the contract and you will pay the invoice in full." Roland slammed his hand against the armrest of his velvet chair. The sudden noise echoed sharply in the spacious office. He stood up, his posture stiffening as he tried to assert a patriarchal authority he had surrendered decades ago. "Zuri, that is enough." Roland barked, his voice laced with forced sternness. "Do not speak to your mother that way. She came all the way down here to extend an olive branch and ask for your help. You are intentionally being difficult. Put your pride aside and do this for your sister." I shifted my gaze entirely away from my mother. I looked dead into my father's eyes. The residual anger I had harbored for Beverly was nothing compared to the deep, aching betrayal I felt toward Roland. Beverly was the attacker, but Roland was the gatekeeper who held the door open and watched me bleed on Olive Branch. I repeated, my voice dangerously soft. "Is that what we are calling it now? Because from where I sit, it looks like a shakedown. But let us talk about you, Dad. Let us talk about your unwavering dedication to family." Roland shifted uncomfortably under my stare. I stepped out from behind my desk, smoothing the crimson fabric of my suit, and walked slowly toward him. "You want to play the righteous father now?" I said, maintaining absolute eye contact. Where was this booming, authoritative voice 10 years ago when Beverly told me my culinary business was a humiliating joke? Where was this protective instinct when she refused to let me sit at the main table during Thanksgiving? Because my natural hair did not fit the pristine country club aesthetic she was desperately trying to sell to her friends. Roland swallowed hard. His eyes darted toward the floor, unable to match my intensity. "That was a long time ago, Zuri. You know how your mother feels about proper presentation. She just wanted you to look polished." "Polished?" I countered, my voice rising with years of suppressed righteous anger. "She wanted me erased, Dad. She literally hired a photographer for the family holiday portraits 3 years ago and told me the schedule was changed, so I would miss the shoot entirely. When the holiday cards went out to your entire congregation, I was not in the picture. And you mailed them. You signed your name on those cards and mailed them to every single person you knew, pretending you only had one daughter." I took another step closer. The air in the office felt charged with electricity. "You stood by and watched her strip away my dignity piece by piece because it was easier for you," I stated, laying his cowardice bare. "It was easier to throw your eldest daughter to the wolves than to stand up to your wife. You traded my mental health for your own peace and quiet. You are the enabler, Roland. You are the reason she feels perfectly justified walking into my building today and demanding a $150,000 venue for free." Roland's face flushed a deep defensive red. He hated being confronted with his own weakness. Instead of apologizing, he resorted to the exact same gaslighting tactics Beverly had weaponized for decades. "You are being entirely too sensitive," Roland insisted, waving his hand in the air as if he could physically swat away my accusations. "You always blow things completely out of proportion. We were tough on you because we wanted you to succeed in the real world. We pushed you. And look at you now. You are a millionaire. You should be thanking us for giving you the thick skin you needed to build this company." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. The sheer audacity of his mental gymnastics was staggering. "I am successful despite you, not because of you," I fired back. "I built this empire with the pieces of my self-esteem that I had to glue back together after you both shattered it. Do not you dare stand in my office and try to take credit for the resilience you forced me to develop." Roland crossed his arms over his chest, jutting his chin out stubbornly. "Family takes care of family. Zuri, no matter what happened in the past, Jada is your sister. She needs this venue to secure her future with Preston. You have the power to fix this, and you are choosing to be petty. Family takes care of family, I repeated, letting the words roll off my tongue to highlight their absolute hypocrisy. That is a fascinating philosophy. Dad, tell me, how exactly does that philosophy apply to the text message I received last night? Roland frowned, genuine confusion flashing across his features. What text message? I did not break eye contact. I recited the words from memory, letting each syllable strike like a physical blow. Don't come tonight. The head count is final. Preston's family is very traditional, and we cannot risk your bohemian lifestyle making us look bad. Beverly gasped, her hand flying to her chest. She had clearly not informed Roland of the specific brutal wording she used to banish me from the engagement dinner. You literally uninvited me from this family exactly 12 hours ago, I said, my tone dropping to an icy definitive pitch. You told me I was not fit to sit at a table with Preston's old money parents. You told me I was a liability. You permanently revoked my membership to this family yesterday evening. You do not get to reinstate it this morning just because you realized I own the bank. Roland opened his mouth to argue, but he had no defense. The raw, undeniable truth of my words had stripped away every single excuse he had left. He looked at Beverly, a flash of genuine anger crossing his face, realizing the massive, unforced error she had made. I walked back around my desk and sat down in my leather chair. I am not helping you, I stated clearly. I am not gifting Jada a venue. I am not calling my connections. If Jada wants Oakwood Manor, she will sign the vendor contract. She will adhere to the strict code of conduct, and she will pay the full invoice. That is my final answer. The tension in the room reached a boiling point. Beverly looked like she was about to explode into a fit of violent rage. Roland looked utterly defeated, finally grasping the impenetrable boundary I had constructed around my life and my assets. Before Beverly could launch into her inevitable counterattack, a soft knock echoed through the room. The heavy oak doors swung open. Jada walked into the office. She was wearing a perfectly tailored pastel dress, projecting the image of a flawless, demure bride-to-be. Right behind her walked Preston. Preston was tall, handsome, and completely unaware of the toxic, highly volatile dynamic suffocating the room. He wore a sharp navy suit and carried himself with the effortless ease of a man who had never been told no a single day in his life. Preston scanned the room, his eyes landing directly on me. A massive, warm smile spread across his face. He stepped forward with genuine excitement, holding out his hand to finally meet the famous sibling his future wife had kept hidden. Zuri Preston said, his voice booming with enthusiasm. It is an absolute honor. Jada has told me so much about you. I have been dying to finally meet the brilliant mind behind this empire. I stood up from my leather chair, smoothing the front of my crimson suit, and reached across the marble desk to accept his handshake. Preston had a firm, confident grip. He looked me right in the eye, his face beaming with the kind of relaxed assurance that comes from a lifetime of inherited wealth and unbroken safety nets. I could instantly tell he was not a malicious person. He was simply oblivious. He had no idea he was standing in the middle of a war zone. To him, this was just a morning meeting with his future sister-in-law. The honor is mine, Preston, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured and professional. I have heard a lot about your family's real estate ventures in the metropolitan area. Preston chuckled, shaking his head in sheer disbelief as he glanced around my expansive office. My father could not stop talking about you last night, Zuri. I mean it. The man practically ignored his own dinner to analyze your acquisition strategy. Buying out the Laura Hospitality Group in a cash deal is an absolute masterstroke. Our firm has been trying to figure out your next move for months, and you completely blindsided the entire market. It is brilliant. I glanced over at Jada. She was standing a few feet behind Preston, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of an 1/8-wheeler. Her pastel dress suddenly looked childish in the stark corporate environment of my headquarters. She kept darting nervous looks between me and Beverly, terrified that the pristine, highly curated illusion she had sold to Preston was about to shatter into a million pieces. Beverly, however, had undergone a miraculous transformation. The moment Preston started praising my wealth and corporate dominance, the defeat she had suffered just moments ago vanished. I watched her posture straighten, her eyes widened, calculating the angles weighing the leverage. Beverly was a social predator, and Preston had just handed her a fresh piece of bait. If Preston's aristocratic family respected my empire, then Beverly was going to claim ownership of that empire by proxy. Actually, Zuri, that is part of the reason I wanted to come by this morning. Preston continued his tone, shifting from enthusiastic future brother-in-law to polished corporate executive. My family's firm is breaking ground on 3 massive mixed-use luxury developments in the Buckhead and Midtown districts next year. We are looking for a flagship hospitality group to anchor the commercial spaces. We want your restaurants, Zuri. We want your boutique hotels. If we combine our real estate footprint with your brand curation, we could dominate the luxury market in the Southeast. It would be a highly lucrative partnership for both of our families. It was a good pitch, a very good pitch. Under normal circumstances, my partner Malik and I would have jumped at the opportunity to anchor those prime developments. It was the kind of multi-million-dollar collaboration that could double the valuation of my holding company in 3 years. But before I could even formulate a professional response, Beverly lunged at the opportunity. She saw the dollar signs flashing in Preston's eyes, and she saw a desperate, immediate path to cement her status as the matriarch of this newly minted corporate dynasty. She stepped right up next to Preston, sliding seamlessly into the role of the proud, supportive mother. She placed a manicured hand on Preston's arm and beamed at him, projecting an aura of absolute familial warmth. "We are just a family of overachievers." Preston Beverly chimed in her voice, dripping with artificial sweetness. "Roland and I have always taught our girls that family business is the best business. We are so thrilled that our families are merging. In fact, Zuri is already leading by example." I narrowed my eyes. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was attempting to trap me in front of the one person I supposedly could not afford to offend. She was trying to weaponize my own professional courtesy against me. Beverly turned her gaze to me, her smile bright and completely hollow. "Is not that right, Zuri? You are so generous." "Preston, you will not believe this, but Zuri just told us that she is actually gifting Jada the Oakwood Manor venue and the full catering package for the wedding. It is her way of welcoming you to the family." The room went dead silent. Jada sucked in a sharp breath, her eyes pleading with me not to blow her cover. Roland stared at the floor, too cowardly to intervene. Beverly stood there, radiating arrogant triumph. She was daring me to call her a liar in front of the man who held the key to Atlanta's highest social echelon. She firmly believed that I would rather swallow a $150,000 invoice than look cheap or petty in front of a billionaire real estate heir. She thought she had outsmarted me in my own boardroom. Preston looked genuinely moved. He turned to me, his face lighting up with sincere gratitude. "Zuri, you cannot be serious. That is incredibly generous of you. Oakwood Manor is stunning. Are you sure? We were fully prepared to cover the venue costs. You do not have to do that." I did not break eye contact with Preston. I did not look at Beverly. I did not acknowledge Jada's silent, desperate panic. I maintained the exact same icy professional composure I used to dismantle rival executives in corporate negotiations. I placed my hands flat on my marble desk and leaned forward slightly. "Preston, I appreciate your kind words, and I am incredibly flattered by your business proposal," I said, my voice projecting absolute unyielding authority. "Your family's developments in Buckhead are spectacular. It is a brilliant pitch. However, I'm going to have to decline the collaboration." Preston blinked, clearly taken aback. The rejection caught him completely off guard. "Oh well, if it is a matter of capital allocation, our firm is more than willing to front the build-out costs for your venues. We really want your brand, Zuri." "It is not a matter of capital, Preston," I replied smoothly. "I have a very strict, non-negotiable policy. I never mix family with corporate acquisitions. My holding company operates completely independently from my personal relationships. Business and family are 2 entirely separate entities, and I keep a solid brick wall between them to protect my peace and my assets. Therefore, I will not be entering into any commercial partnerships with your firm." I let the words hang in the air, ensuring the boundary was crystal clear. Then I delivered the final fatal blow to Beverly's trap. And that exact same strict policy applies to my hospitality properties. I continued, my gaze remaining locked on Preston. "Oakwood Manor is a premier corporate asset. I do not gift my assets away. If Jada wishes to secure the estate for the wedding, she and my mother are more than welcome to sign the standard vendor contract and pay the standard operational invoice just like any other client. There are no family discounts." The atmosphere in the office shattered. The illusion Beverly had just tried to paint imploded instantly. Preston, to his absolute credit, did not throw a tantrum. He was an old money businessman who understood corporate boundaries. The initial shock faded from his face, replaced by a look of profound, quiet respect. He nodded slowly, clearly, recognizing that he was dealing with a shark who could not be manipulated by social pressure. "I completely understand," Zuri Preston said, his tone shifting back to deep professional reverence. "It is a smart policy. It protects the integrity of your brand. I respect your boundary, and I appreciate you being so upfront with me. We will handle the Oakwood Manor contract through standard channels." I smiled politely. "Thank you, Preston. I appreciate your professionalism." I finally shifted my gaze to Beverly. If looks could kill, the glare my mother was giving me would have incinerated the entire building. Her face was flushed a violent mottled red. Her hands were balled into tight fists at her sides. She was absolutely seething. Her brilliant manipulative trap had backfired spectacularly. Not only had I refused to pay for the $150,000 wedding, but I had also publicly rejected a multi-million-dollar partnership with Preston's family, proving that I did not need his wealth or his approval to survive. Beverly had tried to use Preston as a weapon to force my hand, and I had effortlessly disarmed her, maintaining my dominance and protecting my capital in one swift, devastating move. She was furious, humiliated, and backed entirely into a corner of her own making. Preston's phone buzzed in his breast pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the glowing screen, and offered an apologetic smile. "I need to take this. It is my father following up on a commercial zoning permit. Please excuse me for a moment." He turned and walked out of the office. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind him, sealing the room. The second the brass latch engaged, the temperature in the room plummeted. The polished, gracious mask Beverly had worn for Preston melted off her face, revealing the pure, unadulterated venom underneath. She slammed both hands down flat, sat on my marble desk, leaning over it like a predator preparing to strike. "You spiteful, arrogant little girl," Beverly hissed, her voice vibrating with a rage so deep it echoed off the glass walls. "You think you can embarrass me in front of Preston? You think you can parade your money around and treat us like peasants begging for scraps?" "I treated you like a standard corporate client," I replied, not leaning away from her advance. "You are the one who tried to orchestrate a shakedown in the middle of a business introduction." Jada stepped forward, her pastel dress swishing as she crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "You are deliberately trying to ruin my life, Zuri. You have always been jealous of me. You are trying to sabotage my marriage because you are miserable and alone." I did not even glance at Jada. She was just a parrot repeating Beverly's talking points. My eyes remained locked on my mother. Beverly straightened up her chest, heaving as she prepared to deploy her ultimate weapon. In Atlanta, wealth was power, but social reputation was currency. Beverly had spent 30 years cultivating a flawless image among the city's black elite. She knew the pastors of the biggest megachurches. She held a lifetime membership in the most exclusive sorority alumni chapters. She sat on the boards of charities that dictated who mattered and who did not. "Why might own the buildings in this city, Zuri, but I own the narrative," Beverly threatened, her voice dropping to a dangerous, calculated pitch. "If you do not waive the fees for Oakwood Manor, right now I will walk out of this office and ruin you. I will go to Reverend Thomas and the entire congregation. I will call every woman in my sorority chapter. I will reach out to the editorial board of the local society pages." Roland shifted nervously near the door, fully aware of the social execution Beverly was proposing. Yet, he remained entirely silent. He was perfectly content to watch her destroy my name if it meant maintaining his own comfortable status quo. "I will tell everyone exactly who you are," Beverly continued, a wicked, triumphant glint in her eye. "I will tell them that the great Zuri Haynes is a cold, heartless corporate sellout. I will tell them you abandoned the family that sacrificed everything to raise you. I will say that the moment you got a taste of real money, you turned your back on your own blood. I will paint you as a sociopathic, greedy capitalist who refused to support her own sister's wedding out of petty jealousy. Let us see how the community embraces your luxury restaurants when I brand you as a traitor to your own people." The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Beverly was promising a full-scale smear campaign designed to destroy the brand loyalty Malik and I had spent 5 years building. She was demanding the $150,000 wedding as hush money. It was extortion, plain and simple. Pay for the venue and the catering or face a public relations nightmare orchestrated by a master manipulator. Malik had heard enough. His jaw was clenched tight, a vein pulsing at his temple. He stepped forward, his imposing frame casting a shadow over my desk. He reached for the security panic button mounted under the edge of the marble surface. "You are out of your mind," Malik said, his voice laced with absolute disgust. "I am having security escort you out of this building right now, and if you speak a single word of defamation against Zuri or this company, our legal department will bury you in so many legal lawsuits. You will have to sell your house just to pay the retainer." Beverly did not flinch. She welcomed the fight. "Go ahead," she challenged, lifting her chin. "Call your lawyers. Sue your own mother. Let the press run with that headline. Billionaire CEO sues grieving parents. The optics will destroy her career before it even reaches a courtroom." Malik pressed his finger against the button. I held up my hand. The simple, silent gesture froze the room. Malik looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. Roland blinked, leaning forward slightly. Jada stopped breathing. Beverly smirked, a surge of arrogant victory rushing through her veins. I dropped my gaze to the polished marble desk, analyzing the chessboard in my mind. Fighting Beverly in the mud of public opinion was exactly what she wanted. It gave her relevance. It gave her power. If I kicked her out now, she would wage a relentless war of attrition against my reputation. She would play the victim to every influential person she knew. But if I gave her exactly what she wanted, or at least the illusion of it, she would sign the Oakwood Manor contract. She would bind herself to the strict financial liability clauses that she was far too arrogant to read. I did not need to fight her in the court of public opinion. I just needed her to sign the legally binding trap I had already laid. I let my shoulders slump. I let out a long, heavy sigh, expertly crafting the exact performance of a weary, defeated daughter who had finally been broken by her mother's psychological warfare. I made myself look like a woman who simply wanted to protect her corporate brand from a devastating scandal. I looked up at Beverly. Her eyes were shining with the absolute certainty that she had won. She firmly believed she had broken my spirit and forced me back into submission. She believed she had successfully extorted me for $150,000. "Fine," I said, my voice quiet and resigned. "You win, Beverly. I cannot afford a smear campaign right now. The company is in a critical transition phase. Jada will have her wedding at the historic estate. I will make the call and tell the venue director to clear the schedule for you." Beverly's smirk spread across her face like a slow-moving poison. It was the look of a woman completely satisfied that the natural order of the universe had been restored. She adjusted the strap of her designer handbag with a sharp, victorious flick of her wrist. Her chest puffed out with arrogant triumph. She firmly believed she had put me back in my place, dragging the rebellious, ungrateful daughter back under her manicured thumb. "I knew you would finally see reason." "Zuri," Beverly said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and heavy condescension. "You have always been dramatic, but underneath it all, you know that family comes first. I will expect a confirmation email from the venue director by the end of the day, and do make sure they understand we require the premium platinum catering package. Preston's parents have very sophisticated palates." Jada stepped out from behind our father, her posture instantly regaining the haughty confidence she had lost when Preston left the room. Her pastel dress swished as she walked closer to my desk. "I also want the grand ballroom draped in white orchids." Jada chimed in, listing off her demands as if I were a common event planner hired off the street. "And the lighting needs to be warm amber, nothing too harsh. Since you are covering the operational costs, I will just send my wedding planner your direct contact information so she can forward you the invoices for the floral arrangements. Do not try to cut corners. Zuri, we need this to be absolutely flawless." I kept my hands folded neatly on the marble surface of my desk. I did not blink. I did not argue. I simply nodded once, offering the exact blank submissive stare they required to feed their delusions. Roland let out a heavy sigh of relief, clapping his hands together. He looked like a man who had successfully dodged a bullet he never had the courage to stop himself. "That is my girl," Roland said, offering a patronizing smile that made my stomach turn. "I am glad we could handle this like adults. We will see you at the rehearsal dinner, Zuri. Do try to dress appropriately." They turned in unison, a unified front of toxic entitlement, and marched out of my office. They walked with the synchronized steps of conquering royalty. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind them, sealing the room in a sudden, suffocating silence. The moment the brass latch clicked into place, the atmosphere in my office violently shifted. Malik had been standing completely frozen near the corner of the room. Now he exploded. He paced across the expansive marble floor, his polished leather shoes striking the ground with heavy, angry steps. He ran a hand over his face, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin. "Tell me that was a joke," Malik demanded, spinning around to face me. His voice was vibrating with pure, unfiltered shock. "Tell me you did not just let that woman walk into our corporate headquarters, threaten our brand, and successfully extort you for $150,000. I remained seated calmly, reaching for my coffee mug. The dark liquid had gone cold, but I took a slow sip anyway. I did not say a word. Malik threw his hands up in the air in absolute disbelief. "Zuri, what are you doing? We have the best public relations crisis team in the entire state of Georgia. If Beverly tries to launch a smear campaign at her country club or her megachurch, we can bury her in a counter-narrative so fast she will not even know what hit her. You do not negotiate with emotional terrorists, and you definitely do not write them a 6F-figure check to host a party." He walked right up to the edge of my desk, planting his hands firmly on the marble surface and leaning in. "You have spent 10 years building this empire to escape their toxicity." Malik pleaded his tone, shifting from angry to deeply concerned. "You fought tooth and nail to claim your independence. Do not validate their abuse. Do not let them think they can bully you into submission just because they share your DNA. Why did you cave? You do not owe them a single dime." I set my coffee mug down. The sharp clink of the ceramic against the marble echoed in the quiet room. I stood up slowly, smoothing out the invisible wrinkles in my crimson suit. The facade of the weary, defeated daughter completely evaporated, replaced instantly by the cold, calculating precision of an apex predator. I walked past Malik, my heels clicking a steady rhythmic beat against the floor. I moved toward the far wall of my office, where a massive abstract painting hung bathed in gallery lighting. I reached behind the heavy wooden frame and pressed a hidden latch. The painting swung open smoothly on silent hinges, revealing a sleek, flush-mounted biometric safe embedded directly into the steel-reinforced wall. I placed my thumb on the scanner and leaned forward, letting the retinal laser sweep across my eye. The heavy steel door clicked open with a satisfying mechanical thud. I reached into the dark cavity of the safe and pulled out a thick manila folder. It was heavy-packed with certified legal documents and notarized signatures. I closed the safe, swung the painting back into place, and walked back to the center of the room. I stopped right in front of Malik and slid the heavy folder directly across the smooth marble desk toward him. "Open it." I instructed, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm pitch. Malik frowned clearly, confused by the sudden shift in my demeanor. He picked up the folder and flipped it open. His eyes scanned the crisp, watermarked paper inside. He read the bold black ink printed at the very top of the first page. "Oakwood Manor Historic Estate, Master Deed of Trust, Sole Proprietor Zuri Haynes." Malik stopped breathing. His eyes widened to the size of saucers as his brain rapidly processed the legal jargon on the page. He looked up at me, then back down at the deed, and then back up at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "You own the venue," Malik whispered, sheer awe creeping into his voice. "I did not cave, Malik," I stated, meeting his astonished gaze with absolute unyielding authority. "I own the estate, and I am going to let them sign the contract." I walked back around my desk and sat down in my leather chair, leaning back and crossing my arms over my chest. "Bay wants a luxury wedding venue to impress Preston's aristocratic family," I explained, laying out the architecture of my trap with surgical precision. "She wants the prestige of Oakwood Manor. What she does not know is that Oakwood Manor operates under a strict, non-negotiable corporate policy. When the primary financial sponsor signs the venue agreement, they are bound by a heavily fortified code of conduct and financial liability clause." Malik slowly closed the folder, a wicked, understanding smirk finally spreading across his face. "The zero-tolerance policy." "Exactly." I confirmed, a dark, triumphant smile touching my lips. "The contract mandates zero tolerance for verbal abuse or harassment of the venue staff. If the signatory breaches that code, the event is immediately canceled, the party is evicted from the premises, and the signatory is held personally liable for the full $150,000 operational cost, payable immediately upon breach." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk, feeling the exquisite anticipation of the impending execution. "Beverly is blinded by arrogance and a desperate need to secure her social climbing trophy," I continued. "When my venue director slides that contract across the table, Beverly is not going to read the fine print. She is going to eagerly sign her name as the sole liable party because she wants all the credit. She wants to feel like she is the queen of the castle. Malik chuckled, shaking his head in absolute reverence for the strategic mastery unfolding before him. And you know she cannot hold her temper. Beverly cannot go 24 hours without belittling someone she thinks is beneath her. I stated with absolute certainty, she views service workers as invisible peasants. Put a tray of appetizers in front of her, and she will inevitably find a way to demean the person holding it, especially when the pressure of impressing Preston's old money parents starts cracking her fragile facade. I looked out the massive windows at the Atlanta skyline, knowing that I had just secured the ultimate checkmate. I am not paying for Jada's wedding, Malik. I am laying down a $150,000 bear trap covered in white orchids and vintage champagne. I am going to let Beverly march right into it. I am going to let her sign the contract, and then I am going to wait for her to snap. A week later, the heavy iron gates of Oakwood Manor swung open to welcome my mother and sister. I sat in my downtown office thousands of feet away from the sprawling Georgia countryside, watching the live security feed on my ultra-wide monitor. My venue director, Maya, was a seasoned hospitality veteran who knew exactly how to handle demanding, high-maintenance clientele. I had given Maya one very specific directive for this morning: treat them like absolute royalty and let their massive egos do the rest of the work. The high-definition cameras captured Beverly stepping out of her luxury vehicle, adjusting her oversized designer sunglasses. She looked around the manicured botanical gardens and the breathtaking limestone facade of the estate with a hungry, desperate gleam in her eye. Jada followed closely behind her, clutching a pristine white leather bridal binder. They walked up the grand, sweeping staircase toward the main entrance, fully believing they had bullied me into surrendering the crown jewel of my empire. Maya greeted them in the grand foyer with a silver tray of complimentary mimosas served in imported crystal flutes. From my screen, I watched Beverly immediately puff out her chest, soaking in the differential treatment. Maya led them on a comprehensive tour of the 50-acre property. She showed them the private lake glistening under the morning sun, the manicured rose gardens where the ceremony would take place, and finally the grand ballroom. The ballroom was spectacular, boasting floor-to-ceiling windows, hand-carved mahogany wall panels, and massive crystal chandeliers that caught the light and fractured it into a million glittering pieces across the polished dance floor. Jada was practically vibrating with excitement. She spun around the center of the ballroom, her hands clasped over her mouth, completely captivated by the sheer opulence of the space. Beverly walked slowly behind her, running a manicured hand along the expensive silk drapes. She was not just looking at a wedding venue. She was looking at a social weapon. She was calculating exactly how many of her country club associates and church board members she could invite to witness her ultimate social triumph. This estate was the key to securing her permanent position among the city elite, and she wanted it desperately. After the tour concluded, Maya escorted them into the private bridal consultation suite. The room was designed to make clients feel untouchable, featuring plush velvet seating, warm ambient lighting, and silver trays of artisanal pastries. Maya invited them to sit on the velvet chaise lounge and offered to refresh their mimosas. Beverly accepted with a haughty wave of her hand, settling into the cushions as if she already owned the building. I leaned forward in my desk chair, resting my chin on my hands, my eyes glued to the live feed. This was the exact moment I had been waiting for. Maya retrieved a sleek black leather portfolio from her desk. She walked over with practiced elegance and placed the venue contract squarely on the glass coffee table in front of Beverly. The estate is completely at your disposal for the entire weekend, Mrs. Caldwell, Maya said smoothly, sliding a gold-plated pen across the table. We are thrilled to host such a prestigious family. We only require the signature of the primary financial sponsor on our standard event agreement to lock in the dates. Beverly reached for the pen with a smug, self-satisfied smirk. She did not even bother to look at the first page of the document. She was too blinded by her own arrogance, eager to sign her name and secure her bragging rights before Preston's old money family could question her capabilities. Just a moment. Maya interjected perfectly, placing a gentle, professional hand over the top of the document. Before we finalize, I am required by corporate policy to direct your attention to page 4. Oakwood Manor strictly enforces a comprehensive code of conduct and financial liability clause. Beverly stopped the pen hovering inches above the paper. She frowned, clearly annoyed by the bureaucratic interruption. A code of conduct. Beverly repeated her tone, dripping with sudden condescension. What on earth are you talking about? We are high society, sweetheart. We do not need a code of conduct. We know exactly how to behave in a luxury establishment. It is a standard non-negotiable protocol for all of our elite clients. Maya insisted with a but entirely unyielding smile. We pride ourselves on maintaining a flawless environment for both our guests and our staff. The clause mandates a strict zero-tolerance policy for any verbal abuse, harassment, or mistreatment of our venue employees. If the primary signatory or any member of their party breaches this code of conduct, the event will be canceled immediately without warning. Furthermore, the signatory will be held personally liable for the full $150,000 operational cost, which becomes payable upon immediate eviction. Beverly let out a loud, mocking scoff. She waved her hand dismissively in the air, completely insulted by the mere suggestion that she would ever need to be held accountable for her actions. She looked at Maya as if the venue director were a commoner speaking out of turn. "That is absolutely ridiculous," Beverly snapped, crossing her legs and lifting her chin. "I am the mother of the bride. We are spending a fortune to merge two of the most prominent families in the Southeast. You should be thanking us for bringing our business to your doorstep, not threatening us with some absurd behavioral policy. We are not unruly teenagers. We are respectable adults." I watched the monitor, a slow, dark smile spreading across my face. She was taking the bait perfectly. Her ego simply could not tolerate the idea that rules applied to her. Maya did not flinch. She maintained her pristine professional composure, executing her role flawlessly. "I completely understand your position, Mrs. Caldwell," Maya replied, her voice remaining silky smooth. "However, corporate regulations require that the individual assuming full financial responsibility for the event must legally acknowledge the clause. If you prefer not to sign, we can certainly ask Mr. Preston or his family to review the liability terms and sign as the primary financial sponsor instead." That was the kill shot. The very mention of Preston's family taking over the contract hit Beverly like a bolt of lightning. The entire point of this charade was for Beverly to take full credit for funding the $150,000 affair. She needed Preston's parents to believe that her family possessed the generational wealth and influence required to secure and pay for Oakwood Manor independently. If Preston's father stepped in to sign the venue agreement, Beverly would lose her leverage. She would look weak, incapable, and financially subordinate. She would lose the social climbing trophy she had just sacrificed her relationship with me to obtain. Absolutely not. Beverly snapped her panic, instantly, overriding her indignation. "Preston's family is not signing anything. We are hosting this event. I am the sponsor. I am handling the arrangements. Give me the pen." Beverly did not bother turning to page 4. She did not read the fine print detailing the exact parameters of the financial liability. She was completely consumed by her desperate need to project superiority. She snatched the gold-plated pen off the glass coffee table, flipped to the final page of the contract, and eagerly scrolled her signature on the dotted line. She pressed down so hard the ink bled through the thick paper. By signing her name, she legally bound herself as the sole liable party. She took total unequivocal responsibility for the $150,000 operational cost. "There," Beverly said, tossing the pen back onto the table with a triumphant huff. "The contract is signed now. I expect your staff to start coordinating with our floral designer immediately. We have a very tight schedule, and I will not tolerate any incompetence." Maya smiled brightly, retrieving the leather portfolio and clutching the signed execution trap tightly to her chest. "Excellent, Mrs. Caldwell. We look forward to providing you with an unforgettable experience." In my office, I leaned back in my chair and let out a long, slow breath. I watched Beverly sip the rest of her mimosa on the monitor, looking incredibly smug and completely unaware that she had just locked the cage from the inside. Maya expertly slipped the signed document from the table and secured it inside the black leather portfolio with a soft final click. Through the high-definition monitor on my desk, I zoomed in on the document just before it was closed away. Beverly's looping, arrogant signature rested heavily on the dotted line of page 4. She had completely bypassed the bold, capitalized warning printed directly above her name. The clause was a masterpiece of legal fortification, drafted specifically by my top corporate attorneys. It was originally designed to protect the integrity and emotional well-being of our hospitality workers. But in this specific instance, it was the perfect snare. The language was absolute and airtight. It outlined a strict zero-tolerance policy for any verbal, emotional, or physical abuse directed at Oakwood Manor staff. It defined abuse explicitly covering derogatory remarks, shouting, snapping fingers, and any form of demeaning behavior. But the true brilliance of the contract was the financial liability subclause. It clearly stated that in the event of a breach, the event would be terminated immediately. The venue would be evacuated without prior warning, and most importantly, the primary signatory would be held personally and instantly liable for the full $150,000 operational cost. There were no grace periods. There were no mediation clauses. The massive debt became active the exact second the breach occurred. Beverly had just legally bound her own personal assets to her ability to treat service workers with basic human decency. For a woman who viewed the working class as her own personal foot tools, it was a guaranteed financial death sentence. Malik leaned over my shoulder, staring at the monitor as Beverly and Jada gathered their designer bags and strutted out of the consultation suite. He let out a low whistle, shaking his head. He looked at me, a mixture of amusement and skepticism written across his handsome features. "You really think she is going to breach the contract?" Malik asked, crossing his arms over his chest. "I mean, $150,000 is a massive liability. Even Beverly must possess some basic sense of self-preservation. She knows she is putting on a show for Preston's old money parents. Surely, she can hold it together for one weekend just to secure her social climbing trophy." I spun my leather chair around to face him. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that echoed off the glass walls of my office. "Malik, you are giving her far too much credit. You are assuming she views the service staff as actual human beings. She does not. To Beverly, waiters, bartenders, and venue coordinators are essentially invisible furniture. She cannot go 24 hours without belittling someone she thinks is beneath her." I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. When the pressure mounts, when she is desperately trying to control every microscopic detail of this wedding to impress Preston's aristocratic family, the mask will slip. She relies on tearing other people down to regulate her own anxiety. The trap is perfectly calibrated to her exact psychological flaws. She will not be able to help herself. The following weeks passed in a blur of meticulous preparation, while Jada and Beverly busied themselves with seating charts, floral arrangements, and dress fittings. I was quietly orchestrating the operational side of the trap. I briefed Maya and the Oakwood Manor security team. I ensured that every high-define camera in the grand ballroom and the glass-enclosed conservatory was fully functional and recording crisp, clear audio. I wanted every single angle covered. There would be no room for Beverly to gaslight her way out of the consequences. She was going to face undeniable, documented proof of her own toxic behavior. The week of the wedding finally arrived, bringing with it a thick, suffocating wave of late summer Georgia heat. The tension surrounding the event was palpable, even from miles away. The lavish rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Friday evening, hosted in Oakwood Manor's breathtaking glass-enclosed conservatory. The space was an architectural marvel, featuring veined glass ceilings that offered a panoramic view of the starry night sky, surrounded by lush, exotic greenery and climbing vines. It was the perfect setting for a high society gathering. I arrived on site 2 hours before the guests were scheduled to appear. I did not enter through the grand foyer. Instead, I slipped through the discreet staff entrance at the back of the estate and made my way directly to the venue's shadowed control room. The room sat elevated above the conservatory floor, concealed behind a wide panel of two-way surveillance glass. From this vantage point, I had an unobstructed, commanding view of the entire room. I was wearing a sharp-tailored crimson suit, the exact same outfit I had worn on the magazine cover that had shattered Beverly's lies weeks ago. My presence was a ticking time bomb, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate. The guests began to arrive right at sunset. Preston's family mingled effortlessly with Atlanta's elite, their quiet, understated wealth contrasting sharply with Beverly's loud, performative ostentation. The conservatory was decorated flawlessly, exactly to Jada's demanding specifications. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from the ceiling, their delicate petals brushing against the warm amber lighting. A string quartet played softly in the background, providing an elegant soundtrack to the clinking of crystal glasses and the low murmur of affluent conversation. Beverly was holding court in the very center of the room. She paraded around the venue as if her name was etched into the cornerstone of the building. She took credit for every single detail. I watched her point out the floral arrangements to Preston's father, boasting about how she had personally selected the blossoms. I watched her claim responsibility for the perfectly plated hors d'oeuvres circulating on silver trays. She was desperate to prove she belonged in this socioeconomic stratosphere. She was buzzing with a frantic artificial energy, her eyes constantly darting around the room to ensure everyone was paying adequate attention to her triumph. But beneath the gleaming surface, the stress of maintaining absolute perfection was already starting to crack her facade. The stakes were incredibly high, and Beverly was gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were turning white. From the control room, I observed the subtle shifts in her demeanor. Her smile was becoming strained. Her movements were growing jerky and impatient. She was a pressure cooker waiting for a spark. The rehearsal dinner was fully underway, and the fine print she had so arrogantly ignored was quietly waiting to be invoked. The conservatory floor was a masterclass in orchestrated elegance. From my vantage point behind the two-way surveillance glass, I watched the evening unfold exactly as I had designed it. The ambient amber lighting cast a warm, golden glow over the immaculate table settings. Crystal water goblets gleamed alongside heavy silver cutlery and pristine porcelain plates. The string quartet transitioned seamlessly from a classical piece into a sophisticated instrumental rendition of a modern rhythm and blues classic. It was the kind of subtle, culturally rich detail that my hospitality group was famous for providing, blending luxury with authentic cultural roots. Preston's family moved through the space with the effortless grace of people who had never been told they did not belong. Preston's parents mingled with Atlanta's elite, exchanging polite conversation and sipping their drinks. They were entirely in their element, unbothered, and perfectly at ease. Beverly, however, was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She floated from group to group, her pristine designer gown sweeping across the polished marble floor. I watched the monitors closely as she cornered a group of Preston's wealthy relatives near the cascading white orchids. She gestured expansively toward the floral arrangements, her mouth moving in animated, boastful patterns. I did not need audio to know she was taking full credit for the design. She was painting herself as the visionary behind the entire evening, claiming my venue's exquisite aesthetic as her own personal triumph. She did the exact same thing with the catering staff. Every time a waiter passed by with a silver tray of truffle tartlets or seared scallops, Beverly would proudly announce to her guests that she had personally curated the menu down to the last garnish. She was desperate to prove her worth to the aristocratic circle she had just married her daughter into. She wanted them to believe she possessed the same generational refinement that they did. But the higher she climbed on her imaginary pedestal, the more the oxygen thinned out. The immense pressure of maintaining this flawless billionaire-adjacent facade was visibly wearing her down. I leaned back in my leather chair in the control room, watching the psychological cracks begin to form on the high-defin screens. It started small. Beverly kept checking her diamond watch, her movements becoming increasingly sharp and jerky. She would flash a brilliant artificial smile at a guest, and the exact second they lay on their back, her face would contort into a deep, anxious scowl. She paced near the edge of the dining area, whispering furiously to Jada. I watched Jada physically shrink under her mother's intense micromanagement, nervously smoothing down her pastel dress and nodding in fearful obedience. The transition from the cocktail reception to the formal seated dinner was a delicate logistical maneuver. My culinary team at Oakwood Manor operated with military precision, but serving a 5-course meal to a room full of high society guests required exact, careful timing. A minor, completely standard 2-minute delay in the wine service occurred between the first and second courses as the kitchen staff rotated the glacier. For any normal guest, this brief pause would have gone entirely unnoticed amidst the lively conversation and the beautiful live music. For Beverly, it was an absolute catastrophe. To her hypervigilant status, obsessed mind, a 2-minute delay was a glaring spotlight on her perceived incompetence. She firmly believed that Preston's parents were silently judging her for the briefest lull in the service, evaluating her worth based on the speed of the waitstaff. Her anxiety skyrocketed quickly, morphing into a desperate, aggressive need to assert control. She felt her power slipping, and she urgently needed a scapegoat to absorb her panic. Enter Chloe. Chloe was a young, brilliant black woman working her way through a prestigious local university by serving at my high-end venues. I built Oakwood Manor to be a sanctuary, not just for the guests, but for the people who run it. My staff are treated with absolute dignity, compensated generously, and protected by the very contracts Beverly thought she was too important to read. Chloe was one of my best floor staff members, known for her grace under pressure and her flawless attention to detail. Tonight, She was navigating the crowded conservatory floor with practiced elegance, balancing a heavy silver tray loaded with fresh crystal wine glasses and a bottle of red wine. Due to the sheer volume of guests and a minor miscommunication at the staging area near the kitchen, the bottle resting on Chloe's tray was the Standard House Cabernet. It was a fantastic, highly rated wine, but it was not the exclusive, obscenely expensive vintage Bordeaux that Beverly had specifically demanded for the VIP table. Chloe had absolutely no way of knowing about the mix-up. She was simply executing her route, moving gracefully toward the center table where Preston's parents were seated alongside Jada and Roland. I sat forward in my chair inside the control room, my eyes narrowing as I watched the scene unfold on the main monitor. Beverly spotted the label on the bottle from 20 feet away. The realization hit her like a physical shock. In her mind, serving a standard Cabernet to her new aristocratic in-laws was a fatal social error. It was the ultimate embarrassment that would expose her as an imposter. All of her pent-up stress, her raging insecurity, and her desperate need to dominate someone else coalesced into a single toxic focal point. Beverly abandoned her conversation with a local judge abruptly. She marched across the conservatory floor, her heels clicking aggressively against the polished marble. She moved with the targeted hostility of a predator locking onto vulnerable prey. She was not walking over to politely correct a service error or quietly request a different bottle. She was walking over to make a loud public example out of a young worker just to prove her own superiority to the room. Chloe had just reached the edge of the VIP table. She offered a warm, professional smile to Preston's father and carefully reached for the bottle to begin the pouring service for the second course. She never got the chance to open it. Beverly intercepted Chloe with shocking speed. She stepped directly into the young waitress's personal space, physically blocking her from the table. Beverly's face was flushed, a deep, angry red, and her eyes were wide with unhinged fury. I watched the security feed, my heart rate steady and completely calm. As Beverly raised her manicured hand, the string quartet continued to play their beautiful melody, providing a haunting contrast to the ugly, volatile confrontation about to take place right in the middle of my dining room. Beverly's hands slashed through the air. She snapped her manicured fingers less than an inch from Chloe's face. The sharp, aggressive crack of skin against skin echoed with alarming clarity, cutting straight through the elegant hum of the conservatory. It was a vile, demeaning gesture, the kind of physical command reserved for disobedient animals, not human beings. From the control room, I watched the high-defined feed as Chloe froze. Her professional smile vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed look of absolute shock. She stood perfectly still, her hands gripping the edges of the heavy silver tray, desperately trying to maintain her balance as my mother launched into a tirade. "Are you completely devoid of basic intelligence?" Beverly hissed, her voice vibrating with a toxic mixture of panic and cruelty. Her volume was entirely inappropriate for a formal dining room, ensuring that every single guest within a 50-foot radius could hear her. "I specifically ordered the vintage Bordeaux for this table. You brought me cheap, unrefined house wine. Do you lack the ability to read a simple label? Or did you drop out of school like the rest of the failures working in this city?" The words were a calculated strike, designed to tear the young woman down to nothing. Beverly was projecting all of her own deep-seated insecurities onto a college student who was just trying to do her job. She wanted Preston's aristocratic parents to see her demanding perfection, believing that treating service staff like garbage was a hallmark of elite status. She could not have been more wrong. At the VIP table, Catherine and Richard stared at Beverly in absolute horror. Old Moneywealth operates on a strict code of understated grace and polite discretion. Throwing a public tantrum and screaming at a waitress was the ultimate sign of new money desperation. It was crass, deeply embarrassing, and entirely unacceptable. Catherine slowly lowered her crystal water glass, her lips parting in silent shock. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat, exchanging a deeply concerned glance with his wife. Chloe tried to speak, her voice trembling but respectful. "I am so sorry, ma'am. There was a mix-up at the staging area. I will replace this immediately. You will not do anything." Beverly snapped, taking a threatening step forward. "You are entirely incompetent." Right on cue, Maya intervened. My venue director materialized from the crowd with the swift, silent grace of a seasoned professional. She positioned herself smoothly between Beverly and the young waitress, creating a physical barrier to protect my staff member. Maya offered a polite, unwavering smile, her hands clasped calmly in front of her. Mrs. Caldwell Maya said, her tone soothing but firm, attempting to de-escalate the situation. Please accept my deepest apologies for the inventory error. Chloe will return to the kitchen, and I will personally bring the correct vintage to your table right away. Please let us ensure your evening continues flawlessly. A rational human being would have accepted the apology, taken a deep breath, and returned to her seat. But Beverly was not rational. She was a narcissist pushed to the absolute edge of her fabricated reality. Maya stepping in and calmly taking control only infuriated Beverly further. It robbed her of her chosen victim and made her look like the irrational aggressor she truly was. Beverly's eyes narrowed into dark, vicious slits. She looked at Maya, then back at Chloe, her rage bubbling over into pure, unhinged hostility. "Do not you dare patronize me," Beverly shouted, her voice echoing loudly off the veined glass ceilings. "I do not care about your apologies. I care about the fact that your staff is completely useless." Before Maya could issue another calming word, Beverly reached out and grabbed one of the crystal wine glasses resting on Chloe's silver tray. She did not hesitate, driven by a blind, destructive need to assert her dominance. Beverly raised her arm and hurled the glass directly onto the pristine marble floor. The crystal shattered with a violent, explosive crash. The sound ripped through the conservatory like a gunshot. Shards of sharp glass exploded outward, raining down across the polished stone. A dark pool of red wine splattered across the floor, splashing violently onto Chloe's uniform shoes and staining the hem of Maya's pristine blazer. "Clean it up," Beverly shrieked, pointing a trembling manicured finger at the shattered mess. "Clean it up right now. You people are utterly incompetent." The entire conservatory ground to a devastating halt. The string quartet, shocked by the violent outburst, abruptly stopped playing. The sudden absence of music left a deafening, heavy silence hanging over the room. Conversations died instantly. Dozens of high society guests turned their heads, their mouths agape, watching the mother of the bride completely lose her mind. Jada jumped up from the VIP table, her face burning with a fiery, consuming humiliation. She rushed forward, grabbing her mother's arm with desperate, trembling hands. "Mom, please stop," Jada begged, her voice cracking as she tried to physically pull Beverly away from the spill. "Everyone is staring at us. You are ruining the dinner. Preston is watching. Please just sit down." Beverly violently yanked her arm out of Jada's grasp. She was too far gone, fully consumed by the fiery adrenaline of her own toxic meltdown. She spun around to face her daughter, gesturing wildly at the room. "Let them stare," Beverly yelled, completely, abandoning any remaining shred of social decorum. "I do not care who is watching. I paid a fortune for this venue. I spent $150,000 to secure this historic estate, and I demand absolute perfection. I will not have my reputation tarnished by a bunch of lazy, uneducated workers who cannot even follow simple instructions. I demand respect." Preston stood up from his chair. His jaw was slacked in sheer disbelief. The charming, polite illusion Jada had sold him about her loving, supportive family was currently screaming and throwing glass on a dining room floor. He looked at his parents, who were already whispering to each other with deeply troubled expressions. The damage was catastrophic and irreversible. Beverly had just publicly humiliated herself, her daughter, and the entire prestigious family they were desperately trying to merge with. Inside the control room, I stood up from my leather chair. I adjusted the cuffs of my tailored crimson suit, smoothing the lapels with slow, deliberate precision. I looked at the monitor one last time, watching Beverly stand over the shattered glass, breathing heavily, completely unaware that she had just triggered the financial execution clause of her own contract. I turned away from the screens and walked out of the control room. I moved down the carpeted hallway with steady, measured steps. The adrenaline coursing through my veins was cold and highly focused. I reached the grand foyer just outside the conservatory. The heavy mahogany double doors stood closed before me, keeping the stunned, silent crowd separated from the rest of the estate. I placed my hands flat against the polished wood. I did not push gently. I shoved the heavy doors open with a forceful, commanding thrust. The massive mahogany panels swung wide, hitting the interior walls with a resounding heavy thud. The noise drew the eyes of every single guest in the room. I stepped out of the shadows of the foyer and crossed the threshold into the bright amber light of the conservatory. I walked slowly across the floor, my heels clicking a sharp, rhythmic beat against the marble. I bypassed the stunned socialites. I walked right past a horrified Jada and a completely frozen Preston, I navigated the sea of tables until I stood just inches away from the shattered crystal and the dark pool of spilled wine. I stopped. I did not look at the mess. I lifted my chin, squared my shoulders, and looked directly into my mother's eyes. I took one deliberate step forward. The sharp, grating crunch of shattered crystal grinding beneath the sole of my leather heel echoed through the cavernous conservatory. The sound was violently loud in the dead, silent room. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. The string quartet sat completely frozen, their bows hovering lifelessly above their cellos and violins. The elite guests of Atlanta high society held their collective breath, their eyes darting frantically between my tailored crimson suit and the devastating wine, soaked mess covering the polished marble floor. The heavy scent of spilled Cabernet Sauvignon hung in the warm air, a bitter reminder of the chaotic tantrum that had just derailed the entire evening. I broke eye contact with my mother. I did not give her the privilege of my immediate attention. That was not how power operated. Instead, I looked down at the young woman standing near the dark red puddle. Chloe was physically trembling. Her shoulders were hunched defensively, and her uniform shoes were splattered with the dark stains of my mother's volatile rage. I stepped carefully around the pooling liquid and placed a gentle, reassuring hand on her shoulder. The contrast between my calm demeanor and the hostile, toxic environment Beverly had just manufactured could not have been more apparent. "Are you completely unharmed, Chloe?" I asked. I made sure my voice projected a steady, unwavering warmth that carried across the dining room, ensuring every single wealthy guest at the VIP table could hear my exact words. Chloe swallowed hard, nodding her head in quick, jerky motions. "I am fine, ma'am. I am so incredibly sorry about the floor. I tried to catch the glass before it fell. You have absolutely nothing to apologize for," I replied, my tone leaving no room for debate. "You executed your duties flawlessly tonight. No employee of my organization will ever be subjected to this kind of unhinged treatment. You are valued here." I looked over at my venue director, who was already stepping forward to assist. "Maya, please escort Chloe to the staff sanctuary. Ensure she receives a fresh uniform and a full paid week off, starting immediately to compensate for the emotional distress she was just forced to endure. I will personally handle the floor and the disruption from here." Maya nodded with a crisp, highly professional smile. She placed a protective arm around the young waitress, gently guiding the shaken woman away from the dining room and out of the line of fire. I waited until the heavy double doors clicked shut behind them, ensuring my staff was safe before I turned my attention back to the source of the chaos. I slowly pivoted on my heel to face Beverly. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Preston's father, Richard, adjust his wire-rimmed glasses. The recognition hit the venture capitalist instantly. He nudged his wife, Catherine, and leaned in to whisper my name. They recognized the sharp crimson suit. They recognized the face from the digital business magazine cover they had just discussed at the engagement dinner a week prior. The elusive, highly sought-after CEO they had been desperately trying to secure a commercial real estate meeting with was standing right in front of them, commanding the room with absolute authority. Beverly, however, was completely blind to the shifting tectonic plates beneath her feet. Her brain was still operating on outdated delusional software. To her, I was not a titan of industry or a mastermind of corporate acquisitions. I was just Zuri, the disobedient bohemian college dropout who had arrived uninvited to ruin her perfect social climbing performance. The sheer panic of nearly losing her pristine country club reputation in front of Preston's aristocratic family caused her to double down on her typical authoritarian tactics. She could not comprehend that the power dynamic had permanently flipped. Beverly stood up straighter, frantically smoothing the front of her expensive designer gown. She was desperately trying to recover her shattered composure, pulling the ragged pieces of her dignity together. She pasted a rigid, furious glare onto her face, attempting to assert a maternal dominance that had expired a decade ago. She took a step toward me, trying to physically intimidate me out of the space. "Zuri, what on earth are you doing here?" Beverly hissed. She kept her voice low, but it was entirely laced with venom and desperate entitlement. "Have you completely lost your mind? How did you even get past the security gates at the front entrance? This is a private, highly exclusive event. You cannot just barge in here and disrupt my evening. You are intentionally trying to sabotage your sister. You are not on the guest list. You were explicitly told that the head count was final." Jada stood a few feet behind her mother, her face buried in her hands. She wished the polished marble floor would simply open up and swallow her whole. Her pastel dress looked ridiculous amidst the heavy corporate tension I had brought into the room. Roland, my father, had finally managed to stand up from his chair at the VIP table. He hovered near the edge of the shattered glass, his hands raised in a weak, pathetic gesture of peace, but he remained utterly silent. I was still too cowardly to intervene, waiting to see which way the wind would blow before picking a side. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel small. I looked at the mother who had uninvited me from my own family because my natural hair and independent spirit did not fit her rigid respectability politics. She was standing in the middle of a massive, embarrassing mess of her own making, surrounded by horrified aristocrats, and her very first instinct was still to scold me for being uninvited. It was truly pathetic. It was a tragic, desperate display of a woman who had built her entire identity on a foundation of sand, completely unaware that the tide had already rushed in to wash it all away. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream, and I certainly did not throw a tantrum. I simply stood there, an immovable force of nature, letting her frantic, toxic energy wash over me without absorbing a single drop of it. I reached inside the tailored breast pocket of my crimson suit jacket. My fingers closed around the thick, folded legal document I had brought with me from the control room. I pulled the document out slowly. The crisp white paper contrasted sharply against the deep red fabric of my suit. I held it casually in my right hand, a physical manifestation of my absolute leverage. I looked directly into Beverly's panicked, furious eyes, letting a cold, uncompromising certainty radiate from my gaze. "I do not need to be on the guest list, Beverly," I said. My voice cut through the dead, silent conservatory with the chilling, flawless precision of a surgical blade. I own the building. The realization hit Beverly like a runaway freight train. I watched the absolute certainty drain from her face, replaced by a hollow, staggering horror. Her jaw went slack, and her eyes darted frantically around the grand conservatory, suddenly seeing the opulent surroundings, not as her personal social trophy, but as the belly of the beast she had willingly walked into. The soaring glass ceilings, the thousands of cascading white orchids, the flawless marble floors stained with spilled wine, all of it belonged to me. The very ground she was standing on was my territory. "That is a lie," Beverly sputtered her voice, lacking its usual venomous bite. Her hands shook violently as she gripped the fabric of her expensive designer gown. "You are lying. You do not own Oakwood Manor. This is a historic elite institution. They do not sell properties like this to people like you." I did not flinch at the thinly veiled insult. I simply unfolded the thick legal document I held in my right hand. The crisp, heavyweight paper made a sharp rustling sound that carried across the silent dining room. "I acquired the parent company that holds Oakwood Manor earlier this morning," I stated, projecting my voice so that every wealthy guest at the VIP table could hear the unvarnished truth. "I am the sole proprietor of this estate and every other premier hospitality venue under its corporate umbrella. I am the owner, Beverly, which means you are currently standing in my building drinking my champagne and verbally abusing my staff." Preston stepped forward, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sheer awe. He looked at me then, at the document in my hand, and finally at his parents. Richard, the seasoned venture capitalist, let out a low, breathy chuckle of profound respect. He recognized a flawless corporate checkmate when he saw one. Catherine simply sat back in her chair, observing the destruction of Beverly's fabricated high society persona with cold aristocratic detachment. Beverly looked around the room, desperately searching for a lifeline. She looked at Jada, but my sister was busy staring at the floor, wishing she could disappear completely. She looked at Roland, but my father took a distinct, cowardly step backward, distancing himself from the blast zone. Beverly was entirely alone, trapped in a cage she had locked from the inside. I held up the venue contract, ensuring the signature line faced outward. "When my venue director presented you with this agreement last week, she explicitly warned you about the fine print," I said, keeping my tone surgical and precise. "She told you that the primary financial sponsor must adhere to a strict, non-negotiable code of conduct. You were so blinded by your desperate need to look important in front of Preston's family that you eagerly signed your name without reading a single word of the liability clauses. You bound yourself to my terms." I took a step closer to her, stopping right at the edge of the shattered crystal. Page 4, Section BI, recited from memory, letting the legal jargon slice through her remaining dignity. The signatory agrees to a zero-tolerance policy regarding the verbal, emotional, or physical harassment of any venue employee. Any derogatory remarks, shouting, or aggressive behavior will be classified as an immediate material breach of this agreement. I gestured gracefully toward the dark red puddle of wine and the glittering shards of glass scattered across the marble. Furthermore, Section C dictates that the intentional destruction of venue property constitutes an act of hostility. You just screamed at a brilliant young woman who is working her way through college. You demeaned her intelligence. You threw a crystal glass onto my floor in a childish temper tantrum. You have categorically and spectacularly breached your contract, Beverly. The color rushed back into Beverly's face, manifesting as a violent mottled red. Her panic was rapidly converting back into defensive rage. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her chest heaving. "You set me up," Beverly shrieked, completely abandoning any remaining shred of social decorum. "You planned this entire thing just to humiliate me. You lured me here just to ruin your sister's engagement." "I did not lure you anywhere," I corrected smoothly. "You barged into my corporate headquarters and demanded a $150,000 venue for free. You threatened to launch a smear campaign against my business if I did not submit to your extortion. All I did was give you the exact pen and paper you demanded. You are the one who chose to act like a monster in public. I am simply holding you accountable to the terms you legally agreed to." I turned my attention briefly to the venue director standing near the staff entrance. "Maya, please bring up the house lights." A second later, the warm, romantic amber lighting of the conservatory vanished. Bright, unforgiving overhead headlights flooded the room. It was the universal, undeniable signal that a party was over. The sudden brightness exposed the tension, the spilled wine, and the absolute ruin of Beverly's social climbing dreams. I looked back at my mother, delivering the final verdict with absolute, unwavering authority. "You violated the code of conduct, Beverly." I announced, my voice ringing with finality. "The contract is officially terminated. This event is candled. Evacuate my property." The words struck her like physical blows. Jada let out a loud, stifled sob, finally grasping the magnitude of the disaster. Preston's parents slowly began to stand up from their table, signaling to their extended family that it was time to leave. The aristocratic guests murmured amongst themselves, gathering their coats and luxury handbags, eager to escape the radioactive fallout of Beverly's breakdown. Beverly's eyes darted around the room, watching her carefully curated social triumph evaporate into thin air. Her breathing turned ragged. She lunged forward, stopping just inches from my face, her features twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged hatred. "You cannot do this to me," Beverly screamed, her voice cracking under the strain of her own fury. "I am your mother. You cannot kick your own family out into the street. I will destroy you for this. I will hire the best lawyers in the state. I will sue this venue into bankruptcy. I will drag your name through the mud until you have absolutely nothing left. You cannot legally throw me out of a venue I booked." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at the woman who had spent 35 years trying to make me feel small, and I felt nothing but overwhelming, impenetrable peace. I calmly extended my right hand, offering her the folded legal document. "I highly suggest you consult your legal counsel before you make any more poor decisions," I said softly, sliding the crisp paper directly into her trembling hands. "But before you call your lawyers to sue the venue owner, I suggest you read the top line of the master deed attached to that contract." Beverly looked down at the document clutched in her hands. Her eyes tracked across the bold black ink printed at the very top of the page. She read the words that permanently dismantled her power, her leverage, and her entire false reality. "Oakwood Manor Historic Estate, sole proprietor, Zuri Haynes." The thick, watermarked paper trembled violently in Beverly's hands. The bold print spelling out my sole ownership of the estate finally registered in her brain, shattering the last fragile remnants of her fabricated reality. Her fingers went completely numb. The document slipped from her grasp, fluttering down to land among the spilled wine and broken crystal on the marble floor. Total chaos descended upon the conservatory. Preston turned slowly to look at Jada. The charming, oblivious air was gone, replaced by a man staring at a complete stranger. The puzzle pieces of the past few weeks suddenly snapped together in his mind. The lies about my struggling catering gig, the hostility disguised as Southern hospitality, the sudden desperate scramble to book this specific venue. He saw the toxic, abusive foundation of the family he was about to marry into, and he was absolutely appalled. You knew about this, Preston said, his voice terrifyingly calm. You sat at dinner last week and let your mother spin that elaborate, malicious lie about your own sister. You watched your mother verbally assault a young college student tonight, and you did nothing. You hid all of this from me. Jada scrambled forward, grabbing his arm with desperate shaking hands. Preston, please. You have to understand. I had no choice. She made me do it. Jada pointed a trembling finger directly at our mother, instantly throwing Beverly to the wolves to save her own social skin. The golden child, raised in an environment of conditional love and ruthless self-preservation, turned on her creator without a second thought. It was all her idea. Jada screamed, her pastel dress shaking as she sobbed hysterically. She hates Zuri. She has always hated Zuri because Zuri refused to play her games and conformed to her standard of perfection. She forced me to go along with the lie because she was terrified of looking bad in front of your parents. She ruined my life. You ruined my wedding. Mom, Beverly gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. She stared at Jada in absolute horror, watching her meticulously groomed daughter publicly assign her all the blame. Catherine stepped forward, placing a gentle but firm hand on her son's shoulder. The matriarch of the old money real estate dynasty had seen enough. Her tone carried the cold, absolute finality of a judge delivering a permanent sentence. We are leaving, Catherine announced, not addressing Beverly, but speaking directly to Preston. We do not merge our legacy with people who operate like a street brawl. This display is entirely beneath us. Richard did not even look at my mother. The venture capitalist offered me a brief, highly respectful nod of business solidarity, acknowledging the flawless corporate execution he had just witnessed. Then he placed his hand on the small of his wife's back and escorted her toward the grand exit. Preston looked at Jada one last time. He gently but firmly detached her gripping hands from his suit jacket. He shook his head in profound disgust, turned on his heel, and followed his parents out the heavy mahogany doors. Jada collapsed to her knees amidst the shattered glass, sobbing uncontrollably as she watched her billionaire safety net walk out of her life forever. The departure of the wealthy in-laws triggered a primal, desperate panic in my father. Roland finally stepped out from the background shadows, his face flushed with misplaced authority. He had spent his entire marriage keeping the peace by throwing me under the bus. And now, sensing the total annihilation of his family's social standing, he attempted to play the strong patriarch he had never actually been. Roland marched across the marble floor, stopping just inches from my face. He pointed a stern finger at me, his chest puffed out in a pathetic display of dominance. Zuri, stop this nonsense right now, Roland commanded, his voice booming across the room. Look at what you have done to your sister. Look at the destruction you have caused tonight. You need to call Preston's father and fix this immediately. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. You owe this family your loyalty, and I demand you show some respect. I did not back down. I did not shrink. I looked at the man who had spent 35 years hiding behind his newspaper while his wife emotionally battered his eldest daughter. I did not break this family, Roland, I replied, my voice slicing through his artificial authority like a surgical scalpel. I simply turned on the lights. Roland's hand dropped, slightly startled by the sheer unyielding ice in my tone. You stood by for decades while she tore my self-esteem to shreds. I continued stepping closer to him, forcing him to hold my gaze. You watched her exclude me, humiliate me, and discard me because my natural hair and independent mind embarrassed her country club friends. You never raised your voice once to protect me. You let her treat me like a liability because it was easier for you. And now you want to play the big, strong patriarch just because her social climbing check finally bounced. You are a coward, Roland. You have always been a coward. The utter humiliation of Roland's public dressing down was the final breaking point for Beverly. The loss of Preston's aristocratic family, Jada's vicious public betrayal, and the complete dismantling of her husband's authority pushed Beverly entirely over the edge. Her mind violently snapped. Beverly let out a guttural, feral shriek. All remaining pretense of Southern hospitality and affluent grace vanished in an instant. Driven mad by the absolute loss of her control, she lunged forward. She raised her manicured hand high in the air, aiming a violent, open-palmed slap directly at my face. I did not flinch. I did not blink. Before her hand could swing downward, a massive, immovable force intercepted her. Malik stepped flawlessly out of the shadows of the conservatory, accompanied by two towering members of my private corporate security detail. Malik caught Beverly's wrist midair with a firm, unbreakable grip, stopping her assault cold. The two security guards stepped smoothly between us, forming an impenetrable, tailored wall of black suits that constitutes attempted physical assault on the property owner. Malik stated, his voice devoid of any emotion, his grip holding Beverly firmly in place. "You are officially trespassing on private premises." Beverly struggled wildly against the hold, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated hatred. She was gasping for air, her chest heaving as she fully